High school, grades 9, 10, 11, and 12, 14, 15, 16, and 17 years old. Physical characteristics, high school. Most students reach physical maturity and virtually all attain puberty. Although almost all girls reach their ultimate height, some boys may continue to grow even after graduation from high school. Tremendous variation exists in height and weight and in rate of maturation. Approximately 16% of students are considered to be overweight, 13% are obese. As noted earlier, late maturing boys seem to have considerable difficulty adjusting to their slower rate of growth. There is still concern about appearance, although it may not be as strong as during the middle school years. Glandular changes leading to acne may be a source of worry and self-consciousness to some students. The most significant glandular change accompanying puberty is arousal of the sex drive. A brief summary of the types of behavior stressed by the theorists discussed in the preceding chapter is found in Table 3.7. Many adolescents become sexually active, although the long-term trend is down. From 2001 through 2007, sexual intercourse among high school students trended up after having declined through the 1990s, as shown in Table 3.8. In 2007, close to two-thirds of students reported having engaged in sexual intercourse by the end of grade 12. The factors that are significantly related to initiation of sexual activity among high school students vary by gender and race. White males and females with low educational goals and below average grades are more likely to have sexual intercourse at an earlier age as compared with peers who have higher goals and grades. The factors that were most strongly related to initiation of sexual activity for African American female students were having a mother with 12 or more years of education. Presumably, mothers with more education spend less time at home caring for their children, spending less time with one's mother, and being uninvolved in church activities. The factors that predicted onset of sexual activity for African American males were low grade point average, living in a one-parent family, limited contact with the father, and lack of participation in family decision-making. In addition, the onset of sexual activity is associated with subsequent declines in educational goals and achievement and an increased risk of substance abuse. These findings illustrate the pressing need for sex education during the high school years. In particular, adolescents need to understand the distinction between sex and mature love. A major characteristic of mature love is that the well-being of the other person is just a little bit more important than the well-being of the sense. Although the birth rate for unmarried adolescents has fallen in recent years, it remains unacceptably high, as is the rate of sexually transmitted diseases. In 1991, the birth rate for teens of ages 15 to 19 was 61.8 births per 1,000. By 2005, that figure had declined to 41.9. Pregnancy rates for teens 15 to 19 years old have also declined. In 1990, the pregnancy rate was 117 per 1,000, but it slid to 72.2 per 1,000 in 2004. This decline is attributed to a combination of increased abstinence and contraception. Even so, pregnancy rates and birth rates in the United States are considerably higher than in Canada and many European countries because American teens are less likely than their Canadian and European counterparts to use contraception. Among the many factors related to these trends in adolescent sexual behavior, one has clear educational implications. Adolescents who were retained at least once and were behind schedule in their schooling were more likely to have unprotected sex with adolescents who had not been retained than adolescents, not with. They were more likely to have unprotected sex than adolescents who had not been retained. The relatively high levels of sexual activity and low levels of regular contraception among adolescents are particularly worrisome because they put adolescents at risk for contracting sexually transmitted diseases. According to the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention, in the United States, STDs occur more frequently among adolescents than in any other age group. The rates for syphilis, gonorrhea, and chlamydia among 15 to 19-year-olds, for example, are 6 per 100,000, 977.4 per 100,000, and 3,559.8 per 100,000, respectively. The worst of the STDs is, of course, HIV/AIDS. HIV stands for Human Immunodeficiency Virus, and AIDS stands for Acquired Immune Deficiency Syndrome. HIV is the viral cause of AIDS. In 2006, almost 12 adolescents for every 100,000 in the 15 to 19-year-old age group were diagnosed with HIV/AIDS. Applying theories of development to the high school years. Psychosocial development, identity versus role confusion. Concerns arise about gender roles and occupational choice. Different identity statuses become apparent. Cognitive development, formal operation thought for many students. Formal operational thought. There is increasing ability to engage in mental manipulations, understand abstractions, and test hypotheses. Moral development, morality of cooperation, conventional level. There is increasing willingness to think of rules as mutual agreements and to allow for intentions and extenuating circumstances. General factors to keep in mind. Achievement of sexual maturity has a profound effect on many aspects of behavior. Peer group and reactions of friends are extremely important. There is concern about what will happen after graduation, particularly for students who do not intend to continue their education. Awareness grows of the significance of academic ability and importance of grades for certain career patterns. There is a need to make personal value decisions regarding use of drugs, premarital sex, and code of ethics. Trends in sexual activity among high school students. Percentage who reported ever having sexual intercourse, 2001. For females, it went up a little bit from 44.5 to 47.2 in 2007. Males, it went up a little bit, 49.4 to 51.2. Ninth grade went down, 34.8 to 33.2. 10th grade, 40.7, gave way to 43.7. 51.8, increased to 55.4. 12th grade, 60.5 to 64.5. Ethnic groups, blacks, 60.8 to 66.5. Hispanic, 48.4 to 52.0. And white, 43.2 to 43.7. Pause and reflect. What are the advantages and disadvantages of sex education in school? For help with your answer, visit the websites of the National Campaign to Prevent Teen and Unplanned Pregnancy and the Sexuality Information and Education Council of the United States. The disadvantage of sex education is that it necessarily implies that adults are condoning sexuality for those who are unmarried. Social characteristics, high school. Parents and other adults are likely to influence long-range plans. Peers are likely to influence immediate status. When adolescents look for models and advice on such social matters as dress, hairstyle, speech patterns, friendships, and leisure activities, the peer group is likely to have the greatest influence, as a visit to any high school will reveal. Peer values can also influence academic performance. When the issues are which courses to take in school and what different careers are like, teachers, guidance counselors, and parents are likely to have more influence over decision making than peers. For questions about values, ethics, and future plans, the views of parents are usually sought. Not surprisingly, most conflicts between parents and their adolescent children are about such peer-influenced issues as personal appearance, friends, internet and cell phone use, dating, hours, and eating habits. This general pattern may be modified, however, by type of parenting style. The adolescent children who experience authoritarian parenting, see Diana Baumrein's work on parenting styles in the section on the cognitive characteristics of preschool and kindergarten children, have a stronger tendency than other adolescents to make decisions that are consistent with peer group advice. The adolescent children of parents who have an authoritative style, on the other hand, are more likely to make decisions that are consistent with parental advice. Perhaps this is why the influence of parents appears to be greatest when there are mutual affection and respect between parent and child. Girls seem to experience greater anxiety about friendship than do boys. Factors that cause girls to become concerned about the reactions of others were summarized in the preceding chapter. Adolescent girls tend to seek intimacy and friendships. Boys, in contrast, often stress skills and interests when they form friendships, and their tendencies to be competitive and self-reliant may work against the formation of close relationships with male companions. Because adolescent girls often wish to form an intimate relationship with another girl, they are more likely than boys to experience anxiety, jealousy, and conflicts regarding friendships with same-sex peers. You should not be surprised, therefore, if secondary school girls are much more preoccupied with positive and negative aspects of friendships than boys are. Many high school students are employed after school. For any number of reasons, a fair percentage of high school students have part-time jobs during the school year. In 2010, 16% of 16 to 18-year-olds worked after school. These percentages have declined considerably since 2000, when they averaged about 34%. The pros and cons of after-school employment have been vigorously debated. On the positive side, it is thought to enhance self-discipline, a sense of responsibility, self-confidence, and attitudes toward work. On the negative side, part-time employment leaves less time for homework, participation in extracurricular activities, and development of friendships. It may also lead to increased stress, lower grades, and lower career aspirations. Most experts agree that students who work more than 20 hours per week are likely to have lower grades than students who work less or not at all. Emotional characteristics, high school. Many psychiatric disorders either appear or become prominent during adolescence. Included among these are eating disorders, substance abuse, schizophrenia, depression, and suicide. Eating disorders are much more common in females than in males. Anorexia nervosa is an eating disorder characterized by a preoccupation with body weight and food, behavior directed toward losing weight, peculiar patterns of handling food, weight loss, intense fear of gaining weight, and a distorted perception of one's body. This disorder occurs predominantly in females, more than 90% of the cases, and usually appears between the ages of 14 and 17. Bulimia nervosa is an order in which a disorder in which binge eating, uncontrolled rapid eating of large quantities of food over a short period of time, followed by self-induced vomiting, is the predominant behavior. Binges are typically followed by feelings of guilt, depression, self-disgust, and fasting. As with anorexia, more than 90% of individuals with bulimia are female. Adolescents who engage in substance abuse, tobacco, alcohol, and illegal drugs not only jeopardize their physical and emotional health, but also increase their risk of doing poorly in school or of dropping out of school. In 2007, a 2007 survey of high school students found that 20% reported smoking on one or more of the 30 days before the survey, and about 8% reported smoking on 20 or more of the previous 30 days. Almost 45% of high school students reported drinking in the previous 30 days. 24% of female students and 27.8% of male students engaged in episodic heavy drinking, commonly known as binge drinking. 38% had used marijuana at least once during their lifetimes, and 19.7% had used marijuana one or more times in the preceding 30 days. A little more than 7% reported using some form of cocaine at least during their lifetimes, and 4.33% reported using cocaine in the preceding 30 days. About 4.5% of students reported using methamphetamine at least once during their lifetimes. Schizophrenia is a thinking disorder characterized by illogical and unrealistic thinking, delusions, and hallucinations, and is relatively rare among adolescents, affecting less than 0.25% of all 13 to 19-year-olds. Yet it is the most frequently occurring psychotic disorder, and the number of cases diagnosed between the ages of 12 and 18 is steadily increasing. Early symptoms include odd, unpredictable behavior, difficulty communicating with others, social withdrawal, and rejection by peers. The most common type of emotional disorder during adolescence is depression. The most common forms of depression, from least to most serious, are depressed mood, depressive syndrome, and clinical depression. Depressed mood is primarily characterized by feelings of sadness or unhappiness, although emotions such as anxiety, fear, guilt, anger, and contempt are frequently present as well. In 2007, 35.8% of high school females and 21.2% of high school males reported feeling so sad and hopeless almost every day for 2 or more weeks in a row that they stopped engaging in some usual activities. The percentages of white, black, and Latino students who gave this response were 26.2, 29.2, and 36.3 respectively. As you can see from these data, more girls than boys report having emotional responses indicative of depression, as do students of color, particularly those of Latino origin. In the case of female adolescents, increases in sex hormones, specifically testosterone and estradiol, have been linked to depression. Common symptoms of depression include feelings of worthlessness and lack of control over one's life, crying spells and suicidal thoughts, threats, and attempts. Additional symptoms include moodiness, social isolation, fatigue, hypochondria, and difficulty concentrating. Depression in adolescence precedes substance abuse. High school students who experience such symptoms typically try to ward off their depression through restless activity or flight to or from others. They may also engage in problem behavior or delinquent acts carried out in ways that make it clear they are appealing for help. A depressed 15-year-old boy may carry out an act of vandalism, for instance, at a time when a school authority or police officer is sure to observe the incident. Although many techniques exist for changing a negative self-concept to a positive view of self, one effective approach to minimizing depression is to help as many of your students as possible to experience success as they learn. Techniques to accomplish this goal will be discussed in subsequent chapters of the book. If depression becomes severe, suicide may be contemplated. In 2007, 14.7% of high school students had seriously considered attempting suicide during the previous 12 months. 11.3% had made a suicide plan, and 6.9% had made one or more attempts. Many more females than males considered attempting suicide. 18.7% versus 10.3% respectively, and made one or more attempts, 9.3% versus 4.6%. The only good news in these statistics is that they are lower than they were in 2005. Latino teens are more likely than white or black teens to consider a suicide attempt, 15.9, 14, and 13.2% respectively. And to make a suicide attempt, 10.2%, 5.6, and 7.7% respectively. As of 2005, the death rate from suicide in the 15 to 24-year-old age group was highest for American Indian, Alaskan Native males, 32.7 per 100,000, and females, 10.1 per 100,000, and lowest for Asian or Pacific Islander males, 7.2 per 100,000, and black females, 21.7 per 100,000. The single most important signal of a youth at risk for suicide is depression. Along with the common symptoms noted earlier under point 2, other signs of depression and potential suicide include poor appetite, weight loss, changes in sleeping patterns, difficulty in concentrating, academic problems, poor self-concept, withdrawing from friends and or social activities, giving away prized possessions, lack of interest in personal appearance, and feelings of loneliness. These symptoms take an added significance when accompanied by a family history of suicide or parents who commit abuse or use drugs and alcohol excessively. The factors that usually trigger a suicide include a shameful or humiliating experience, such as perceived failure at school or rejection by a romantic partner or parent. If you notice that a student in one of your classes seems extremely depressed, take the trouble to ask if there is anything you can do to provide support, and seek the advice of the school counselor. To encourage students to discuss their concerns with you, suggest that they read books written for adolescents that address suicide in a direct and forthright manner. Your interest and sympathy may prevent a suicide attempt. Also, be aware that recent prevention efforts include school-based programs. These programs, which are run by a mental health professional or an educator, or both, are typically directed at high school students, their parents, and their teachers. They usually include a review of suicide statistics, a list of warning signs, a list of community mental health resources, and how to contact them, and a discussion of how to refer a student or peer to counseling. Cognitive characteristics, high school. High school students become increasingly capable of engaging in formal thought, but they may not use this capability. These students are more likely than younger students to grasp relationships, mentally plan a course of action before proceeding, and test hypotheses systematically. Without supervision and guidance, however, they may not use such capabilities consistently. Accordingly, you might take advantage of opportunities to show students at these grade levels how they can function as formal thinkers. Call attention to relationships and to ways that previously acquired knowledge can be applied to new situations. Provide specific instruction in techniques of problem solving. Ways you might do this will be discussed in Chapter 10, Constructivist Learning Theory, Problem Solving and Transfer. Although some students may ignore your advice, others will probably take it more seriously. Despite the constant attempts of adolescents to appear totally self-sufficient and independent, they still view parents and teachers as knowledgeable authority figures when it comes to school achievement. Between the ages of 12 and 16, political thinking becomes more abstract, liberal, and knowledgeable. Joseph Adelson used an interview approach to obtain information about the development of political thought during the adolescent years. At the start of the interviews, the participants were requested to imagine that 1,000 people had ventured to an island in the Pacific for the purpose of establishing a new society. The respondents were then asked to explain how these people might establish a political order, devise a legal system, establish a balance among rights, responsibilities, personal liberty, and the common good, and deal with other problems of public policy. The analysis of the interview responses showed no significant gender differences in the understanding of political concepts, and no significant differences attributable to intelligence and social class, although brighter students were better able to deal with abstract ideas and upper-class students were less likely to be authoritarian. The most striking and consistent finding was the degree to which the political thinking of the adolescent changed in the years between ages 12 and 16. Adelson concluded that the most significant changes were 1. An increase in the ability to deal with such abstractions as freedom of speech, equal justice under law, and the concept of community. A decline in authoritarian views, an increase in the ability to imagine the consequences of current actions, and an increase in political knowledge. Increased ability to deal with abstractions is a function of the shift from concrete to formal operational thought. When 13-year-olds were asked, "What is the purpose of laws?" a typical answer was, "So people don't steal or kill." A 15 or 16-year-old, by contrast, was more likely to say, "To ensure safety and enforce the government." When considering punishment for crimes, younger children, Piaget's moral realists, hold the conviction that laws are immutable and that punishment should be stern. But by age 14 and 15, the adolescents whom Adelson interviewed were more likely to consider circumstances and individual rights and to recommend rehabilitation rather than punishment. If you will be teaching courses in social studies, you may find this information useful in lesson planning. It may also help you understand why students may respond to discussion of political or other abstract matters in different ways.